And today I'm so pleased to have with me Dr. Corey Seemiller. Hi, Corey.
Hi.
And Dr. Seemiller is an author, she's a professor, she's a speaker at Wright State University. And she especially researched and wrote the book, Generation Z Goes to College. So we're glad to have you with us today.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your research and your background and the areas of research you're most interested in.
Well, great. Yeah. Well, it's funny because if you would have asked me 5 years ago, would I be sitting here talking to you about this now, I would never have predicted that. My interest in Generation Z really stems from my own work with them as a population and my own curiosity. So unlike some researchers who just kind of go into studying something that just seems sort of interesting on the periphery, I was living this experience where I was working with students as they were coming into college and saying, we need to better understand these students. And so from that experience, I worked with a colleague of mine, Megan Grace, who's the co-author on our works, and we decided to actually embark on a study of first-year college students who fit into the age range of 1995 through 2010 birth dates, and that's the Generation Z birth range. And we really did it because we wanted to learn more about who these students were as they came to college and figure out how to best adjust the programs we were working with at the college level. We both were designing and offering leadership development programs, and we wanted to make sure that our programs were still relevant for this new cohort of students coming in. So we didn't really have any anticipation of doing anything bigger than just saying, who are these students? Let's figure them out and then try to improve our own work on a day-to-day basis. But we kind of tapped into this new area of research that people weren't hitting on at the time. And we wanted to share that with people because what we found was actually groundbreaking. This is a generation incredibly different than millennials. And we were all operating from a millennial mindset, and some people still in a Gen X mindset. I mean, we still have programs and processes and services that in higher education that were just not meeting the needs even of millennials. And here we are with a new generation. So we needed to kind of look at where we were going with them. So our research actually began in the fall of 2014. That would be the second first-year cohort of Generation Z. That first year that they came to college was, if you look at the dates we use, it was fall of 2013. But we did a study in the fall of 2014, and then we got a number of other research projects that people were doing on this population, and we started to kind of see these themes emerge about this group of people that were incredibly different, like I said, than millennials. And so from that, we wrote a book called Generation Z Goes to College, and looked at everything from how they build relationships using technology all the way to how they develop leadership and how they learn in the classroom. And so it was a very fun project and really kind of set the tone for our future research initiatives that we've done. That at the time when we did this research study in the fall of 2014, Megan and I actually are the first to admit it was a pretty small study. We only included students at 15 colleges and universities. And that was because we had no intention of even publishing it. We just wanted to kind of get a snapshot of what was going on. And then we had a lot of people say, you got to publish this, you got to publish it. But what we did at the time that was really, really neat was we asked these students open-ended questions as part of our survey. So unlike a lot of the research that's out there, just in general, most people collect a lot of quantitative research. So you can find out how often or how many, but we were hearing the voices of the students describing their ideal learning environments or what they use technology for. And so we had this just great data that we were sitting on, that these narratives from these students. So we wrote our book. It came out 2 years ago. We just had our birthday for our book a couple weeks ago. It came out in 2016. And we decided that we wanted to do even a bigger study because more data has come out about this generation from other sources. Again, small studies for the most part, but we put together a project in spring of 2017 called the Generation Z Story Study. And we haven't published quite a bit on this yet. We're in the middle of working on a book about it, but we have more than 2,000 students from 50 colleges and universities. We have them, there's even 2 colleges in Canada and 1 in Mexico. And we just asked 7 open-ended questions. What gets you excited about getting up in the morning? How is your generation going to change the world, right? These questions that just were big questions, and they wrote stories. That's why we called it the Stories Project. Stories and stories, and it took us months to read through all of them to just get a feel for, we could feel their energy, their tone, their excitement, their hesitance, their anxiety through their words. It was way different than checking a box on a scale. And this data was really, really telling. And so what we've done since then is we have used a lot of our own research, but along with research from other higher ed agencies, like the Higher Education Research Institute that's pulling together surveys, Pew data, census data, adolescent research data, market research data. We have hundreds of studies that we're collating into one. Almost all of them are quantitative. And so our stories are telling the rationale behind these numbers. But what we're finding as we go into this next round of research is we're finding almost the same stuff that we found the first round. And all these studies are saying the same thing over and over. And as a researcher, I will tell you that's kind of like the golden ticket. You hardly ever find when research actually matches from study to study, and we're finding such consistency. So Megan and I have decided to put out a new book. It's not released yet, but we're going to write about a much more holistic approach to understanding this population. The book right now, we're still in the process of writing it, just kind of finishing up, called Generation Z, A Century in the Making. And the whole idea is that these students didn't just come out of nowhere. They've been shaped by the context and the forces of those of us that came before them. And so we go back 100 years in history and look at trends and fads and themes that lead up to who they are. And this new book covers things like their spiritual outlook, their entertainment and hobbies, answers some big questions about healthy and risky behavior. And so what we're doing is we're taking all this research and putting it into our new book. So this is really kind of what the research is where we're at today. We're really excited, hopefully having this book out. The goal will be to have it out by the end of this particular year in 2018. We're hoping to get it out. But we feel like it's going to be an excellent book to pick up, whether you're an educator, you're a parent, you're a coach, you're a supervisor, you're a youth group leader, whatever it is, whatever role you have with students, you pick this book up, you're going to have a much better understanding of this particular cohort. So that's a little bit of the background of the research we've been doing. Megan and I sort of divide and conquer with our research. We are very well versed in all aspects of the research we do, but she tends to lean a little bit more towards technology, communication, friends, relationships. And I tend to lean more towards things like politics, civic engagement, leadership, education, learning, those pieces. But we're, like I said, pretty well versed on all of it. So we are going to continue moving forward with this book, but we also have a couple other projects in the hopper. One of them is this summer, we are partnering with someone down in Brazil who's working on replicating our US study on Generation Z with higher education institutions in Brazil. And we're going to do a comparative analysis, which is going to be a lot of fun. So we've had a lot of requests to do some international work where we can actually say, does what we're learning about Generation Z in the US hold up in other places around the world? So Brazil is kind of the first one out of the gate on this. They're super excited to work with us. They've got a lot of institutional support, and we're hoping to be able to get some data out on that, both in Brazil and in the US as we move forward with that study. So we've got a lot of really neat things going on. Megan's going to be starting a podcast here soon on Generation Z. I'm offering a 3-credit course through Wright State University at the graduate level for understanding and working with Generation Z as they go to college. So neat stuff. I'm just really excited to be on the precipice of just the great stuff that we're learning about this generation.
Well, it demonstrates why you're a trendsetter and why this is such an important topic, because it hasn't been until your book came out 2 years ago. Nobody was talking about it. And now, there's a lot more conversation. And you mentioned the domestic versus international. Do you have a feel for what that difference might be yet? Like in your stories and things that you mentioned Canada and Mexico, are you anticipating seeing some differences, or are you seeing it's still pretty similar across borders?
It probably is a little bit more country dependent.
Okay.
We've had instances where we've been interviewed. I was interviewed by the Globe and Mail in Canada, and I always said, I'm going to be really honest. This is U.S. data, and I said you're probably going to find a lot of crossover, but I can't say that this applies. And as I was describing, what we had found, she had, the reporter had tapped into a number of other sources in Canada and said, yeah, we found the same stuff. Not surprising, it's US and Canada. But interestingly, the same thing happened with Brazil. I was interviewed, and there's two articles in Portuguese that I can't read, but they are about.
We have Portuguese here. We teach Portuguese in our
excellent. Well, maybe somebody can read it.
Here, so.
We have the link on our website. And I'm like, okay. But anyways, when I did the interview with the reporter there, she said, we're finding a lot of the same stuff in Brazil, which was actually interesting because now we have this potential, we have this study going on with Brazil. And then, as a matter of fact, Megan went maybe a year ago or 2 years ago, she went out to Denmark and she spoke at, I think it was University of Copenhagen. And they said, we're seeing some of the same stuff here. So there are some similarities. We haven't gone to Asian countries. We haven't worked with Asian countries or African countries specifically. There's going to be a lot of nuances, especially around politics, economies, those kinds of things. But I do see some trends as things like technology, or when we saw the recession that impacted, it had a more of a global impact. Probably going to see some similarities, and then of course some contextual differences based on the countries.
So what are some of the life or world experiences that you found in your research that had a particular effect on students, that were kind of stood out in their impact for students in Generation Z?
There's a couple things that we really kind of resonate with in terms of trying to better understand them. The one thing is that the older ones, this generation spans, our first graders through our first year graduate students. It's a fairly large range of people, but the ones we've been studying have been at the top of that range, the older ones. And they're really the recession kids. They're the kids who came of age when, their parents might have lost their jobs, or maybe their families lost their homes, or they knew somebody, or they had to cut back at home, or somebody had to get a second job. The recession, even as a little kid, they understood that something was happening around money and we didn't have a lot of it. And that they needed to be worried about it. And now we're getting these, whether the families have bounced back or gotten jobs and the economy has arguably gotten better, you're talking about a generation of kids that are coming to college that have been told to, whether it was verbally or just through the messages they received around them, to be worried about not having enough money. And now we're sending them into our schools, our colleges and universities that have record high tuitions.
Yep.
And telling them, like, you should buy this and basically put it on a credit card, and you're going to be paying off loans potentially until the day you die because it's so expensive. And it's kind of a hard sell to a group of people who is worried about money and also saw people lose jobs, knowing that jobs aren't always going to be there and they're not always going to be a source of income. So we've got this paradox, right, where we're trying to really convince this group of young people to go to college, and unless they have some type of resources to do that, the everyday middle class student, unless they're on a scholarship, they're worried about this. So that's one of the biggest influences. Another one, and I think that we're seeing it all compounded in a number of things, but these are our post 9/11 kids. The oldest were in kindergarten when 9/11 happened. So their recollection of the days before 9/11, they don't really have that, and they just sort of know that the world is very scary and we need to be scared. And post 9/11, we've had lots of policies and things come up, and it can be scary. And we, as you see in the news, there's instances of scary things happening all the time. And even just this week, obviously, things like school shootings and these things, some of this stuff has been around obviously for longer, but it's some of it is amplified. There's more of it today. There's more reason to be scared for some of them. And then in other cases, we have this thing where it's almost like a vicarious trauma where, we have a group of students who can literally watch violence and watch real life tragedy unfold right on social media. So for me to read about something is really different than me watching something happening on Facebook Live, where I'm literally watching it or clicking on a YouTube video that someone shot of domestic violence or something. So they are literally placing themselves in these positions where they can witness tragedy. And so then we have a group of students who are, a lot of them are just frankly scared. They're scared. And you're hearing about it, especially even this week, as you hear some of the kids from the high school in Florida speaking out about the school shooting, talking about, you have to do something. We're scared. We're scared to go to school. And they're not the only ones that are scared. They're just the ones who happen to have the experience. But there are so many kids that are scared to go to school. They're scared of being not just bullied, but cyberbullied, not just stalked, but cyber stalked. And there's so many ways to be scared. And I'm not saying that we have just an incredibly completely frightened generation, but I am saying that we do have to be aware of the fact that the world feels a little scary for them. And they're being sent off to college to be on their own. And some of them aren't just scared about that, but they're just scared about the world. And now they don't have that buffer or that safety net. So, we have that kind of lingering with this generation. And then I think third, and probably one of the most pronounced things that we're seeing, is that we're having a lot of issues around diversity, inclusion, and social justice. That these, especially the ones that are the older part of this generation, are seeing. Their first election was 2016 for the oldest. That was not a typical election. There was a lot of rhetoric, and there's been a lot of, I guess, angst, regardless of political party, since 2016. And there's no room for civil discourse. There's something in the news every day about some population of people that something's happening with, or some law or something. We have this generation that is one of the most inclusive and welcoming and diverse generations in history, yet they're in an era which feels like it might be far less than what they would prefer. And I think they're trying to reconcile looking at the adults around them that are their role models and saying, I'm not understanding why you're supporting things that are oppressing my friends, or why you're voting in certain ways. And these are real issues. And when you even look at it by a political party, even those in Generation Z who identify as conservative are still very supportive of things like same-sex marriage and legal path to citizenship. And so for them, they're seeing their politics and their social justice views as not being together. And they're living in a world in which those things are heaping down on top of them. So, you have all of these things compounded, and then you throw in one more thing, which we haven't even discussed, which is technology. Mm-hmm. And the 24/7 access to pretty much anything that you want. So we've armed our kids with phones at an early age. This generation has had smartphones for, many of them, not all of them, but many of them have had smartphones. They've had access to internet. They can get online and do just about anything they want to do, communicate whenever they want to communicate. And so they're used to having this rapid fire, I can get it when I want it. And what's kind of a shock or a shell shock for some of them as they go into a college environment is that higher education is one of the last institutions in our society that doesn't operate on a 24/7 mentality. You can go to the doctor 24 hours a day. There's e-medicine. You can balance your checkbook and transfer money in the middle of the night. You can buy, a pair of sunglasses on Amazon at 2 a.m. You can do almost anything that you need to do, any transactional thing that you need to do 24 hours a day, except in higher education. Because higher education, we close at a certain time. You can't see your advisor over the weekend if you have a question. You can't, and I'm not suggesting that higher education changes that, but I'm saying we have situated this population of students in a world in which they can get it when they want it. Look at even Netflix. They can watch anything that they want at this exact time. And then we put them in an institution that doesn't operate like that. And I'm not sure that we have prepared them to slow down, to take a moment, to say, you better get that done before Friday at 5 or you're not going to be able to see somebody again until Monday. And I don't think we do. And they come into college and they're just sort of all over the place. And as a professor, I'm getting emails at 3:00 in the morning. And I can say potentially, well, maybe they're just sending it to me because they're up then and they know that when I get up during office hours, I will respond. But the reality is they would be very, very happy if I responded at 3:01. And that's sort of why they're sending it at 3 in the event that I might be up and could reply to it at that point. So we do have all these things that just kind of, I would say, kind of hover over this generation as they're looking to come to college, good, bad, and otherwise, but are just really shaping what they're looking for in the college experience.
So how does that, those are all very significant things that this generation has gone through, and it really has impacted them. How do we as counselors or advisors or even parents, how do we do, as you said, prepare them for that transition from the world that they live in, especially with that technology, to higher education, which, as you mentioned, the wheels turn a little bit differently. So what can we do to help them with that?
I think even before we help them with the adjustment into college, I think there's something that we need to do even before that, which is try to help articulate the value of college. Mm-hmm. And when someone values something or they see that it's important, they often find a way to make it work for themselves. They put out extra effort. They're more committed to it. They're more engaged. And, we know research about that shows that. The question that we're going to come down to is going to be more, do these students value a college education enough to slow down their wheels of technology to match higher ed, to be in an environment that might be new and scary and those kinds of things, if they don't see a value in going to college in the first place. And and I know that the population of people, most of the folks that are on here today, are people who are helping students as they go to college, but we have a whole cohort of people that aren't going, and it's continuing to increase with this particular age group. There's more than ever, we have alternatives to college. We have really, really great programs that are going to work apprenticeship programs with major companies where you come in as an intern right out of high school and they'll give you a job after a year of training. Those kinds of things are happening, and they don't require the student to incur debt, and they're with a good company. What's interesting about this particular generation is that, like some of the older generations, other than millennials, a lot of them are really grounded in this idea, if I can find one good place to work, I'll stay there the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. So that wasn't necessarily the case for millennials. They moved a lot because there were more jobs than them. So they had a lot of choices. But Generation Z, if they could get in and do some kind of apprenticeship for a year right out of high school with a really good company, they could see themselves staying there for the rest of their lives. So why go to college, right? The second thing is, college is just so expensive. And what's happening, not only are people having to take out loans and those kind of things, but the other thing that's really interesting is, as technology rapidly advances, the purposes in which students go to college to get trained for become obsolete just in the short time that they're actually in college. They go in to train for something, and you go in as an engineer, you come out, you might be using totally different platforms. And you have literally spent 4 years behind your high school friends that went directly into the workforce. And so in that case, it's, we, and I say we because I work in higher education, we're up against a lot here trying to help students see the monetary value in college. Take the other fact too, that, nearly half of them want to work for themselves. And, take some type of a hobby. You should see how many of them are actually in the gig economy as high schoolers. They found not just babysitting and mowing the lawn or anything like the typical things I grew up with, but they're doing resales on eBay, and they're doing artwork on Etsy and selling it. I mean, a lot of them have a clear career path right out of high school. Does that mean college is irrelevant? No, but it means these are forces that we're up against. It costs a lot of money to get trained to do something that I'm not sure is going to even exist when I get out. And I could do something pretty cool without a degree. So what do you do with that? How do you sell that to someone? So we have to change the message of what college is for. College is in some ways still for training and development of skills that are going to be useful in the workforce. That's probably not going to go away. I don't think that's the biggest message. And this is probably where I get to be a contrarian, right? Students can get on MOOCs, or they can do all sorts of things, internships without even being in colleges, to get some of those skills. But what college can be are two things, I think. One is a great practice laboratory to say, okay, yeah, you want to work for yourself, but do you really know what you're doing quite yet? Why don't you go to college and get some background on how you want to go about starting your own business? Try it. If you fail, we're here. We're guiding you. We're a safety net of your learning. Whereas if you just skip that, you don't get that safety net. We're a practice lab. You get to actually maybe go out and do some internships in a college setting. You get to actually practice what it is that you're doing. The other thing that college is excellent for is for connection. Helping students make those professional connections that they need to be successful. Colleges are very, piped into local employers and even national and international employers and saying, here, how can we get students connected? Having those references and having the networking that you need. These are critical things. The other thing that I think that is excellent about college and is a great selling point about college is kind of taking us back to the liberal studies purpose of college, which is to create a well-rounded, holistic, critical thinker who can navigate the world. It's interesting if you go to a career fair, how many career fairs at colleges where there's signs up that say looking for English majors. A lot of employers want people who can write, who can think, who can work in teams, nothing tied to a specific job. A lot of employers are even saying, listen, I can train you on my platform when you get here. I just need to know that you can write a sentence. I just need to know that you can interact with people professionally and verbally be able to have a conversation. So college is the place to get those experiences that develop the holistic element of the person so that when these students are graduating, yes, they have some job skills, but they have these networks. They have these holistic life skills that they need to be able to navigate the world. And they're able to be prepared and armed to go into whatever they want, because I'll tell you, whatever they're training for now, if we already think it's going to be obsolete in 4 years, it's certainly going to be obsolete in 10 or 20. The world is they're going to be changing careers so many times. College can't just be a place to train you for a job. I mean, some need that, like obviously doctors and lawyers and things, but a lot of jobs do not need a specific major in order to get that job. So what do you do with your college time is you help prepare someone with the skills they need for a lifetime. And we have gone for the last, several decades on this idea that college will get you a good job.
Right.
And although there's potentially some truth to that, I'm not sure that that's a selling point for students who have to fork out potentially $100,000 to go to a state school for 4 years when they can potentially get a good job without that. We need to be telling them that what they're going to get in college, they can't get anywhere else. And so for us, I think that there's a big part of it with parents and advisors and anyone working with students is to help them understand the deep-rooted message of the purpose of college. Because if we can tap into that, we can help them get excited about what they're passionate about, finding ways to get linked into making choices about schools that have the things that they want. Whether it's, it's the major they want, which is probably, they're not really looking at that. As a matter of fact, when you look at things students are looking for, major is not really one of them, unless it's an incredibly specific major. They want to know that they're going to feel safe. They want to know that there's going to be activities and experiences that they can get engaged in that foster what they care about. They want to know that they're going to meet people. They also want to know, for many of them, that they're going to be fairly close to home. And these are the things that they're looking for. Yet the messages we continue to tell them seem to kind of fly in the face of that. And those are messages for millennials. You're going to get a good job. Yeah, you go to college, you're going to get a good job because there's a lot of jobs to choose from, and you're going to get one of those. But for Gen Z, they're like, I'm going to get a good job anyways. And if not, I'm just going to turn my hobby into my freelance job, and I'm going to just, live by my means. So there's some things that we have to do about the messaging, but I also think that there's some things that we need to do around our guidance and our role modeling. I know that it's interesting to think about saying, when I was in college, for those of us who went to college, when I was in college, this was important to me, or when I was in college, I did this, and making recommendations and ideas based on our own college experiences. College is really, really different today. Like, I'm not even that old, and I went to college before the internet. So my context of how I explain to students as to how to do a research paper is like incredibly different. And if if you're not speaking the language of the students in their context, they're not going to connect with you. And so I can say, well, when I went to college, when I lived in the residence halls, you want to be on that hall council. They're like, we don't have hall councils anymore. Or maybe they say, no, that's not something I want to do. So we have to be aware of what they're looking for, not what we think they should be looking for.
And how do we do that? How do we as parents or educators, and I'm thinking about, it is we're in a totally different generation making this advice, giving this guidance to students, and also listening to parents, because the parents are telling us, go, have your children go to STEM. They need to go to a name brand school. They need to be able to have a job. And especially with families that are first generation American, that's also a big concern. Education is a high goal for them, but their perspective on what it is, what it entails, is very different from what you've described. So, what are some communication or things that we can do as other, coming from another generation to help be able to bridge that gap between the two generations?
I think a couple things. One is doing our research. Mm-hmm. Thinking about how often do, folks who do advising and guidance into colleges, how often do you spend time on college campuses, and a variety of them? Yeah. How often do you literally just go and walk around? Not go to one meeting, not get on the website, but literally go around and maybe chat with some students to get a feel for the schools. Because I will tell you, working on a college campus, it's really different when you're there than when you read about it on the web. And I'm not sure, I'm sure there's probably several professionals that do that on a regular basis. But I would think
a lot do that for that exact reason.
Yep. But I would think literally going into the, to the food court and sitting there and just observing people is a critical thing. The second thing is going to be reading up on research about what this generation wants. And continuing to keep up on that, because sometimes if we, without having any kind of lead-in question, or at least an idea of what might be going through their minds when they sit down to talk, you can sort of start going down the wrong path, and a line of thinking that isn't going to be as productive as potentially you would think. It's interesting. I talk a lot with admissions folks, college admissions people, and we talk a lot about using the word major. And I said, how's that go over with students when you ask them what they want their major to be? And they said, well, they kind of stare at us, blank faced. And I said, why is that? And they're like, well, because a lot of them don't even really fully grasp what a major is. And I said, I've worked in higher education for 25 years, and I still don't really kind of understand what a major is. It's a socially constructed concept on a college campus that might be around a discipline, might be around a job, might just be around an area that the school thinks is important, and we cluster classes like that. But when you're asking a student, what do you want your major to be? What do you really want to know? Do you want to know that you're going to check the box so that you can fill it out and say, okay, they want to be a business major? Or are you really trying to figure out what their passion is? I said, have you ever asked any of these students what they think their calling might be? And they got a little nervous about that. And I said, you track back research on people when they look at their calling. Most people can tell you what their calling was by the time they were age 4. They might not know what the name of it was. I want to help people. I love animals. I wanted to teach. Look at me, I'm teaching. I knew that by the time I was 4 years old. We know what our calling is at a young age. We just can't name it. And part of going to college is being able to explore what that calling is and get plugged into the right people and experiences and networks. Yet we're still framing the conversations around language that is very technical, like major, and even career. What kind of a job do you want? If I have a calling in teaching, I can do a lot of different jobs as if my calling is teaching. I don't have to just be a teacher. And so I think those are the kinds of things that people can do to open up that conversation to something more exploratory in the kind of way that they see the world. What are your fears? What are your anxieties? A lot of them, like I said, they're living in a very scary place in this world, and they want to know, they want to feel safe. We're going back to this idea of in loco parentis. They want to know that colleges and universities and the people that work there are going to take care of them and be like parents to them. And they have some anxieties. And so I think some of these things are just around the conversations that we have, and with these young folks and helping them kind of match what they're looking for with their college applications. Now, granted, you have to answer those questions like, they want to get a good job and they want to do this. Those things are outcomes. Those are byproducts of a very good college experience. If that is the purpose of college, then we have failed them. Those are byproducts. If you go to college and you invest yourself and you're engaged and you work hard and you get good grades and you find something and you follow your calling, that is what this generation wants. that will lead to a job. When we looked at things about, what was most important to you, especially in looking at jobs, financial security and money and stuff ranked way down. It was happiness, fulfillment, enjoyment that ranked way up. So we need to be doing some more work around helping them find their passions and their callings, rather than getting them plugged into a job, because for them, they feel like the job will come. And for the most part, they're living in a world in which the job kind of does come because you can create it. And they're not looking, a lot of them aren't looking to be millionaires. So for them to make a modest living on something that they really enjoy is an actual feasible career path for them. So I think a lot of this has to do with these particular conversations and really how we frame them and how do we get into their context and not into our own context.
That makes a lot of sense. One of the things we do in Guided Path is we start off with surveys or ways to help students do self-reflection. Who are you? What do you want to do? Why is that important to you? And can you articulate that? Because it helps motivate them and comes down to the core of who they are and what they're doing. So I think that's really wise advice. One of the things you mentioned that I think is we're noticing a lot as counselors, advisors, and we're always talking about, well, what's the best fit? Let's help students find the colleges that's going to meet their needs in many of these different ways that we've been talking about. But then we're dismayed when they don't want to go far away. They only want to stay. I often think it's here because I'm in California, but we hear that whether they're in Ohio or Brazil or anything else. So can you talk a little bit about that? Why is that? I mean, sometimes we feel like we're at cross ends with them. There's this great school in Pennsylvania, but you won't look at it because it's too far away. So,
well, I know it's the irony, right? In a time of heightened technology where you can keep in touch with people through Skype and things, where being far away doesn't have to feel as far away. They want to be closer than ever. Well, there's a couple things that we can sort of postulate around this. One, and one of the more obvious ones for some folks is just simply the financial cost of it. Being able to maybe live at home and commute to something would save them money, or being able to stay at in-state tuition. So there's in some ways a pretty practical reason for some of them. Others, though, what's interesting is if you look at data that talks about role modeling, for this generation, 69% of them say that their number one role model is their parents. They seek out advice and mentorship and guidance from their parents more than any other generation. That number was considerably lower for millennials and even much more lower for Gen X when they were in college. So this is a generation that puts a lot of faith and trust into their parents, and they see their parents less as these, we've had this helicopter parent, right, of millennials. Now we're seeing it as the co-pilot, where they're actually wanting their parents to be a part of their college experience rather than uninvited, where millennials were like, oh, mom, or don't call the teacher for me, but they kind of want you to call the teacher for them. But Gen Z is saying, like, I want you to be a part of this decision with me. I want you to be a part of this experience with me. I want to be close to you. I want to be able to come home and talk to you about when I'm having trouble with, my person I'm dating, or when I'm struggling with a class assignment. You're almost in some ways, and I hate to use this word, but like friends. They want to seek that trusted guidance. And they feel like they have had their, parents or family, brothers, sisters, whoever they've been, for many of them have been in their homes their whole lives. These are the people they trust the most and they feel the most comfortable with. So in a very scary world, leaving that behind is tough. And then knowing that those are the people that they go to for guidance and they're not right there, that can be tough too. I mean, as a Gen Xer, I went to college and it was just pretty typical that your parents sort of drop you off and then like 4 years later, they come back at graduation. Like it wasn't unusual for that. But even my Gen Z students in my classes, there's no way, almost all of them live at home. And then they still say, I call my mom 3 times a day to tell her about what's going on. And I said, don't you live at home? Yeah, but I can't wait until I get home because I have to tell my mom about all this stuff. So they like being close. They feel that sense of support. And so that's kind of a hard thing to combat because, I mean, you're talking about trusted relationships, the foundation of their whole soul. And then trying to convince them that this really cool school in Pennsylvania is going to be an awesome experience. That's a real tough thing to be up against. And so, are there places that are good fits that are a little bit closer? Could they do 2 years at a community college potentially? And then, as like a little buffer and then transfer somewhere? Are there other options in between?
And I think that's a really good point too, is that now there are becoming more options, the community college or hybrid, where they can take online and do some coursework in, in a classroom, and really look at those different options. I think that's very helpful, because it is definitely, we're coming at it. We have to recognize we're coming at it from our own generational perspective, and we need to be willing to put those blinders down and look at it from and that's why I think the work and the research you've done is so important, because it helps us to understand that. And we're very excited about the new book that you're working on. I think it just is a great sequel to the work that you and Megan and others have done. And so we'll definitely keep our audience apprised. So now's a good time if you have some questions. I see we have one question. If you find the question and answer section on your screen and you have some questions, we're going to take a few minutes and ask Dr. Seemiller some questions. So I see one question. Jeff asks, what level of differences were found geographically within the U.S.? Did you find certain parts of the country were more or less prone to certain aspects of your research?
That's a great question. The data set was too small to separate out by region. So I have a lot of people who say, well, what about like students with disabilities, or what about women, or whatever? The data sets on almost all of the data that's being collected about this generation is just far too small to separate that out. Anecdotally, as I visit schools, people will tell me things that have to do with their particular regions, but there's nothing really from a research standpoint that I've come across that has a big enough N or data set to really be able to separate out in a significant way. But I do think that as we get further into the research of this generation, we're going to potentially start to see larger and larger studies that might be able to do that. Or as I was mentioning, we're doing a study where we're doing an international comparative study with Brazil. So if we intentionally go out and look at, okay, the differences between California and Florida or something, that might be a specific study later on down the road where we separate it out like that. But for right now, we haven't been able to determine that.
So, and that makes a lot of sense. Another question is, how do we advise these, any thoughts or things, how do we advise these kids effectively and convince their parents we know what we're talking about? So, I think that probably has more to do with the points that you said about doing our own research and being able to really point to it. But being able to point to a book or research like what you've done, or a website or things like that, I think is key. But what about colleges? And someone else, and I was wondering this too, you just came back from a university here in California. What changes should colleges be making? This is Colleen. What changes should colleges be making to better serve these students? And second part, have you seen any innovative programs that are currently doing this?
A lot, and yes. So I talk to various groups of people. I'll talk to everybody from admissions recruiters all the way to people who do student leadership and civic engagement on college campuses to faculty. And there's lots of things that can be done for a number of those particular groups of people. And if in the book itself, in Generation Z Goes to College, all of chapter 10 lays it out, where it has recommendations for what higher education can do. Everything from changing learning environments, physical structures, all the way to, things that have to do with food and dining. I mean, there's all sorts of things that universities can do, far too many to list here. So I would definitely refer you back to that book. But I will tell you that there are some really neat things that are happening at some schools. A couple things that I've come across and have learned about that are really neat. We highlight in our book, North Carolina State University recently built a library that is very Generation Z friendly in the way that they learn. So if you get on their website, you can see some of the furniture, it's movable. This is a very dynamic learning generation. They prefer independent learning before group learning, as opposed to, if you look at libraries that were built for millennials with, glass rooms and big tables for collaborative learning, that's not how Gen Z learns. So you're going to see some different environmental designs. I've also recently learned, and have to do a little bit more research on this, but Ohio State University has a center, I believe it's called the SMART Lab, and it stands for, I think, Stress Management and Resilience Training. And it's actually, students can go in and make appointments. It's not like counseling, but it's more like going in and you can get techniques for stress management, group activities on building resilience, things that we know that this generation is the most stressed out generation ever. And they're coming to colleges with high rates of mental health issues. But are there people that maybe don't have particularly diagnosable issues, or maybe they do, but would find something like that Smart Lab really useful and supportive as a place where they can go to de-stress, learn techniques to kind of bounce back and get back on track of whatever it is they're doing. So there's some really kind of neat, innovative stuff that's happening, but they're happening in little pockets. And what I'm finding is more schools are saying, "Wow, there's a lot we should be doing." But as higher education funding is limited, and we know that it's a very, very big machine that takes lots of people to approve anything. There could be an idea in the hopper now that we might not see for 10 years to fruition. By that time, we have Generation Alpha coming to college and trying to figure that out. But a lot of really neat things that I have heard people doing. But check out the book for some recommendations if you're interested in things you can do on your own campus.
So you bring up a really good point, and many questions have been popped up on this because we as counselor advisors are experienced in seeing that level of anxiety of students and that heightened level. And one of our goals is to help reduce that. So are you finding that there are certain things that really contribute to their anxiety? Having, for example, someone asked, having parents involved as, friends or co-pilots in their process, does that increase their anxiety, or are there other things that are really contributing to that?
I don't have data specifically on the factors that are contributing. I would not say that parents in the college process is probably one of the things that's even on their mind. When we asked them one open-ended question that was, "What do you worry about most?" I don't even remember reading one thing about my parental involvement being on there out of thousands of things I read. It was interesting because some of them were sort of in the moment worries. I'm worried about school. I'm worried about my grades. A couple people worry about their health, those kinds of things. They're actually, most of them, and most of the responses out of the thousands of responses we got were all around worries for the future. And they weren't just worries about themselves. I'm really worried that the economy is going to fall out from underneath all of us and that we're going to have no money for our senior citizens to retire with. I'm really worried that we're killing our planet and that we're not going to be able to have anything to breathe, eat, or drink when by the time I get to be 50. I'm worried. I am literally carrying the world's burdens on my shoulders about the future. And it's fascinating to me because for such a young generation to be so we-centric versus me-centric is new. We haven't seen that in a long time. And so, yes, they have the everyday anxieties and worries that any typical teenager would have, right? Friends and all that. You compound that with their worries for the future. And then you add in this element too of technology, where they have every reason to continue to worry because they were left out of a text message, or they were, all these things that are happening on social media. How many likes did I get? So you've got a lot of that going on too around self-esteem issues. So you've got this kind of three-legged stool here where you've got the day-to-day stuff that typical teens deal with. You've got technology, which, when I was a teenager, we didn't have social media. I didn't have to worry about how many people liked me. If they didn't like me, they were just at home thinking that they didn't like me, and I didn't know that. And then, and then you also have the pressures of the world and the direction that the world is going, which many of them are not really pleased about. And they're very, very worried about that. And so that's just weighing down on them. So while many of them we have high rates of actual diagnosed mental health issues, we have a number of other students that are either A, not diagnosed, or B, wouldn't be diagnosed, but are still very worried and have a great deal of anxiety as young people, way more than young people should be having.
So how do we help them get a perspective on that? Jennifer says, so the 24/7 access to information about all the events around the globe is a blessing and a curse. It's a two-edged sword. How do we help them keep perspective? Are there tools or resources or things that are, I know some people have I was listening to a PBR report of a technology-free day where, at sun up, sundown, everybody turns off their technology for a day and just unplugs. And Are there other
Yeah.
things that are being recommended or found effective to help this generation have that perspective?
Well, it's a really interesting question because we talk about this in like in the faculty world, where we say, should we have policies that require our students to turn off their cell phones, for instance, so they can be more engaged? We're finding that they're not really more engaged because they're sitting there wishing that their cell phone was on. So really the issue, and they're worried about what messages are coming in and things that are happening while they're not aware, this fear of missing out. So while I can recommend some very short-term tactical things that we can do, the real issue stems back down to this idea of self-esteem. And students are, really worried about what other people are thinking of them. So this specifically with the technology stuff, we're looking at some real self-esteem issues. And until everybody turns their phones off from sunup to sundown, or everybody does that, it's not going to work. It's not going to have a long-term impact, because I'm not sure about you, but if I don't check my phone for a day, it's not that I'm like, whew, I'm totally relaxed. No, I'm worried about what's popping up on my phone when I'm not looking. And so we have to think about some strategies that get to the heart of kind of the self-esteem, about why some of these students care so deeply about what people think of them. Where did that come from? We have to model that. As adults, we're doing a really bad job of telling them to stay off their devices, and then we're on our devices doing that. So I think part of it is even just simply modeling that for them. But, I think a lot of this goes back to having some really kind of important conversations that might not have to even do with college, when we're talking with these teenagers about, what do you worry about? And don't even think about college. I just want to know, what do you worry about? What do you think about? What do you think when your friends do this? What does that make you feel like? Because I can imagine, and I don't have any research to show this, but the fear of missing out is a real phenomenon that happens. And that much is proven by data. But I could imagine that if all of your friends are going to the college down the street, and you're considering going to that really cool college in Pennsylvania, that fear of missing out that has been part of your whole world for your whole life is only going to be exacerbated if you're physically not at the same school that they are. I mean, there's all these things are somehow connected into their self-identity and self-image. And until we can get to the root of that, which I think is, probably is beyond my pay grade. That's a lot of mental health counseling. That's where this problem resides. What are the small things we can do? Have these conversations, acknowledge their fears, help them find strategies that will work for them to, check out a little bit from technology every now and again. Maybe encourage them to narrow down. They're prone to have multiple social media accounts. Maybe tell them, maybe it'd be easier if you just narrowed it down to 2. Instead of 6. That's just less to manage, less to worry about. There are some tactical things we could do, but at the root of it all, it really goes down to self-image, self-identity.
That's yeah. And I often tell my students, especially with the UCLA program, that it's not about college, it's about counseling. And majority of what we do is not the college side. That's, in a lot of ways, that's the byproduct. It's counseling. So we have to be prepared to do that. So thank you so much. This has just been fascinating. I know we have many other questions, and we'll pull those out and get answers. How do people find out about your book? Where do they go? What's the website to be able to order your current book? And then also, we'll definitely keep in touch so we can find out as your new book comes out. So where do they go to learn more about Generation Z Goes to College?
You can go to our website, which is, we got a brand new one just recently. It's called www.whoisgenerationz.com. And what you'll find on there is great. You're going to find a lot of information about our research and all that, but you're also going to find links to a number of interviews like we're doing right now. I have other interviews on very specific topics, podcasts, along with written pieces. We've got several blogs that Megan and I have written that are on there as well. Just a lot of good resources that you can see well beyond what we talked about today. You can also buy the books on there. We have another book that I didn't talk about. It's called Generation Z Leads. And it's for educators to design civic engagement, leadership, and social justice experiences for students that align with who they are in Generation Z. So that book is available on there as well. And then downloading some articles we've written. So that's a great place. But we've picked one social media site. We've decided it's our site. It's Twitter. And we're at Gen Z College.
This has just been very enlightening, and I know our audience has really appreciated it. It's great to hear you have a podcast as well, because I'm sure many people will be subscribing. And if you
Yes.
haven't bought the book, those of you that are listening, I told Dr. Seemiller, it was one of the first things I did when I heard it came out. I went and bought the book immediately, and I just found it fascinating. And so I would highly encourage you to go to the website and look at the information. And again, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.